My husband kissed my sister in front of me, claiming she was helping with my baby. I uncovered their plot and took control of my daughter's future. It started 3 weeks after I gave birth to Violet. I was exhausted, bleeding through pads every 2 hours, and my stitches hadn't healed properly. My sister Isabel showed up with groceries and this bright smile, saying she wanted to help her favorite niece. At first, I was grateful. She'd hold Violet while I showered. She'd fold the endless laundry. My husband Daniel seemed relieved to have the extra help. He'd been sleeping in the guest room, claiming my night wakings were affecting his work performance. Then I noticed small things. How Isabel would rush to pick up Violet the second she cried, barely giving me a chance. How Daniel would ask Isabel's opinion about formula brands instead of mine. How they'd have these long conversations in the kitchen while I sat alone in the nursery. The kiss happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd come downstairs after finally getting Violet down for a nap. They were standing by the sink, and Daniel leaned in and pressed his lips to Isabel's forehead. A long, lingering kiss that made my stomach drop. Daniel saw me and smiled like nothing was wrong. "She's been such a lifesaver with Violet," he said casually, just showing my appreciation. I wanted to scream, but Violet was sleeping upstairs. So I just nodded and went back to the nursery, my hands shaking. That night, I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through our bank statements. There were charges I didn't recognize. A hotel in the next town over from 6 weeks ago, right before Violet was born. Dinner reservations for 2 at the restaurant where Daniel proposed to me. I checked Daniel's location history on our shared account. He'd turned off sharing 3 months ago, claiming it drained his battery. The next morning, I pretended everything was fine. Then I went through the nursery closet where we'd stored old moving boxes. In Daniel's laptop browser history, I found searches from 2 months ago. How to establish paternity rights. Can father get custody of newborn? Postpartum depression and parental fitness. They weren't just having an affair. They were building a case. I spent the next week documenting everything. I recorded Isabel telling Violet, "Auntie loves you more than anyone." I screenshot text messages between them discussing my emotional state and my inability to bond properly. The breaking point came when I overheard them in the kitchen. Isabel's voice was low but clear. "She's not getting better. Dr. Morrison said postpartum psychosis can last months. We could petition for emergency custody if she becomes a danger to herself or the baby." Daniel sighed. "I know. But Violet deserves a stable home." "A stable home with you two?" Isabel asked. "With us," Daniel corrected, the way it should have been from the start. I grabbed Violet from her bassinet and my emergency bag I'd packed that morning. I'd opened a separate bank account the day before and transferred exactly half our savings. I'd contacted 3 lawyers. As I walked down the stairs with Violet strapped to my chest, they both turned to stare. "I'm taking my daughter to my mother's house," I said calmly. "I'll be filing for divorce and full custody tomorrow morning. I have recordings of you two planning to declare me unfit. I have proof of your affair dating back to before Violet was born, and I have Dr. Morrison's actual notes saying I'm recovering normally and showing no signs of psychosis." Isabel went pale. "I called him yesterday," I said. "Told him someone was making false claims about my mental health using his name. He was very interested to know who that might be." I walked out the door and didn't look back. That was 4 days ago. This morning, I received an email from Daniel's lawyer demanding I return immediately. They've filed an emergency motion claiming I'm experiencing a mental health crisis. My lawyer just called. The hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m. I have all my evidence ready. But Daniel's lawyer just sent over their witness list, and my mother's name is on it. Mom's house felt different when I arrived that first night. She opened the door wearing her reading glasses and a bathrobe, her face creasing with concern when she saw Violet strapped to my chest and my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "What happened?" she asked, pulling me inside. I told her everything. The kiss, the searches, the overheard conversation. She listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening with each detail. When I finished, she made up the guest room and held Violet while I collapsed onto the bed. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Your father would be proud. Dad had died 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He'd been the steady one, the problem solver. I missed him desperately in that moment." The next morning, I met with my lawyer, a woman named Patricia Brennan who came highly recommended by a friend from my prenatal yoga class. She was in her 50s with gray hair pulled into a tight bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed all my evidence. The recordings, the screenshots, the bank statements, the browser history, Dr. Morrison's actual medical notes that I'd requested and received within 24 hours after explaining the situation. "This is solid," Patricia said, tapping her pen against her legal pad. "They're trying to paint you as unstable, but you've documented their entire scheme. The affair alone won't get you full custody, but the conspiracy to fabricate mental illness and remove your parental rights? That's something else entirely." "What about my mother being on their witness list?" I asked. Patricia frowned. "That's concerning. What's your relationship like with her?" "Good," I thought. "We've always been close. Has she met Isabel recently?" My stomach sank. Isabel had been at Mom's house just last week, helping her install new curtains in the living room. They'd spent the whole afternoon together while I was home with Violet, too exhausted to join them. "I need to talk to her," I said. That evening, I found Mom in the kitchen making dinner. Violet was asleep in the portable bassinet we'd set up in the living room. I sat down at the table and asked her directly, "Did Daniel's lawyer contact you?" She stopped chopping vegetables. Her silence was answer enough. "What did they ask you?" She set down the knife and turned to face me. "They wanted to know about your emotional state after Violet was born. Whether you seemed overwhelmed, whether you'd mentioned feeling disconnected from the baby. What did you tell them? The truth, she said. That you were exhausted, that you cried sometimes, that you told me once you weren't sure you were doing anything right. My chest felt tight. Those were normal feelings. Every new mother I knew had expressed similar doubts. They're going to use that against me, I said. Mom's face crumpled. I didn't know. Isabel called me last week and said she was worried about you. She said Daniel was concerned too. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual. I thought she was just being a caring sister. The pieces clicked into place. Isabel had been setting this up for weeks, maybe months. Getting close to Mom, planting seeds of doubt, building a narrative. What else did you tell the lawyer? I asked. Mom sat down across from me. She asked if you'd ever left Violet alone, if you'd ever seemed angry at the baby, if you'd talked about wanting your old life back. And? I told her no. You've been nothing but loving toward Violet. But she kept pushing, asking the same questions different ways. Finally, I said that all new mothers struggle and that doesn't make them unfit. Patricia called me that night with an update. I've reviewed the witness list more carefully. Your mother isn't the only one. They've also got your sister, obviously. Daniel's mother. 2 of your neighbors. And a woman named Claudia Vance who works at your pediatrician's office. I don't know anyone named Claudia, I said. She's the receptionist. According to the filing, she'll testify that you missed 2 scheduled appointments and seemed disoriented during check-ins. I did miss 2 appointments. One because Violet had been up all night with gas and I'd overslept. Another because I'd written down the wrong date. Both times I'd called and rescheduled immediately. This is what they do, Patricia explained. They take normal new parent struggles and reframe them as evidence of instability. We'll counter it. But you need to prepare yourself. This hearing won't be pleasant. I spent the next 18 hours preparing. Patricia had me write down every interaction I could remember with each witness. Every conversation. Every text message. We built a timeline of Isabel's involvement, showing how her helpfulness had coincided with Daniel's growing distance. I pulled phone records showing I'd called Daniel 11 times during Violet's first week home when she wouldn't stop crying, and he'd answered twice. I found emails I'd sent him about pediatrician recommendations and sleep schedules that he'd never responded to. I documented every night he'd chosen to sleep in the guest room instead of helping with night feedings. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in a conservative navy dress and pulled my hair into a neat bun. Mom watched Violet while I drove to the courthouse with Patricia. Daniel was already there with his lawyer, a tall man in an expensive suit named Harrison Webb. Isabel sat behind them, wearing a cream blouse and pearls, looking like the picture of concerned family support. My mother arrived separately and wouldn't meet my eyes. The hearing was in front of Judge Catherine Walsh, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. She reviewed the filings in silence for several minutes before looking up. This is an emergency custody motion filed by the father alleging the mother is experiencing a mental health crisis that poses a danger to the minor child, she said. Mr. Webb, present your case. Harrison stood and painted a picture of a woman unraveling. He described my crying spells, my exhaustion, my missed appointments. He called it a pattern of deterioration that had Daniel and Isabel increasingly concerned for Violet's safety. Then he called his first witness. Daniel's mother, a woman named Constance who'd never liked me, took the stand and testified that I'd always seemed cold and distant, that she'd worried from the beginning whether I really wanted to be a mother, that during a visit 2 weeks after Violet was born, she'd found me staring at the wall while the baby cried in another room. What she didn't mention was that I'd been on the toilet, having just discovered I was bleeding heavily enough to soak through a pad in 30 minutes, terrified I was hemorrhaging, that she'd barged into my house uninvited, that Daniel had been the one who was supposed to be watching Violet in that moment, but had fallen asleep on the couch. Patricia cross-examined her briefly, establishing that Constance saw me exactly once during Violet's first month and had no medical training to diagnose postpartum conditions. Next came the receptionist, Claudia. She testified that I'd seemed confused and overwhelmed during office visits, that I'd snapped at her once when she'd asked me to fill out paperwork while Violet was screaming. Patricia asked her how many new mothers she saw every week who were stressed during appointments. Claudia admitted it was most of them. The neighbors, an older couple named the Hendersons, testified that they'd heard crying coming from our house at all hours, that they'd seen me walking around the yard at 2 a.m. in my bathrobe, looking dazed. Patricia established that newborns cry frequently, and that many mothers walk colicky babies outside to soothe them. Judge Walsh looked unimpressed with their testimony. Then Isabel took the stand. She described finding me crying in the nursery, saying I didn't know how to do this. She described moments when I'd handed Violet off to her because I needed a break. She described my unwashed hair, my stained clothes, my 1,000-yard stare. She made it all sound sinister instead of normal. Patricia's cross-examination was brutal. How many times per week were you at your sister's house? She asked. 4 or 5 days, Isabel admitted. And why were you there so frequently? To help with the baby. Did your sister ask you to come that often? Isabel hesitated. Not exactly, I offered. Patricia pulled out the text messages. She read them aloud. Messages from Isabel saying she'd stop by. Messages from me saying I was fine, I didn't need help. Messages from Isabel showing up anyway. Would you say you inserted yourself into your sister's household? Patricia asked. I was trying to help, Isabel insisted. By having an affair with her husband? The courtroom went silent. Harrison jumped to his feet objecting, but Patricia had already made her point. Judge Walsh called a brief recess. I sat in the hallway with Patricia while she reviewed her notes. They're not making the case they think they are, she said. The judge sees tired new mother, not dangerous mental patient. But we need to hit harder when we present our side. When we reconvened, my mother was called to the stand. She looked at me finally, her eyes red. Harrison asked her the same questions. Had she noticed me struggling? Had I seemed overwhelmed? Had I expressed doubts about motherhood? Yes, Mom said quietly. She was struggling. All new mothers do. But did this seem like normal struggling, or something more severe? Mom took a breath. I don't know. I've never seen her like that before. My heart sank. Patricia stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Brennan, when your daughter was born, did you struggle? Mom blinked. Of course. Everyone does. Did you ever cry? Yes. Did you ever feel overwhelmed? Yes. Did that make you an unfit mother? No. Did your daughter ever harm her baby? No. Never. Did she ever neglect her baby? No. Did she do anything that concerned you enough to report to authorities or seek intervention? Mom looked at me. No. I thought she was just tired. Patricia nodded. Because she was just tired. Like every new mother in history. When Mom stepped down, she mouthed, I'm sorry to me. Patricia called me to the stand. I testified about the affair. About the planning. About overhearing them discuss fabricating postpartum psychosis. Harrison tried to rattle me, but I stayed calm and factual. Then Patricia called Dr. Morrison. He testified that I'd been seen for all standard postpartum checkups. That I'd reported normal levels of stress and adjustment. That I'd asked appropriate questions about infant care. That I showed no signs of psychosis, severe depression, or any condition that would impair my parenting. Someone called my office claiming I'd diagnosed the mother with postpartum psychosis, he said. I never made such a diagnosis. In fact, I found the mother to be coping remarkably well, given that she was apparently managing most infant care alone while recovering from a difficult delivery. Harrison tried to discredit him, but Dr. Morrison had detailed medical notes from every visit. Finally, Patricia played the recording. Isabel's voice filled the courtroom. She's not getting better. Doctor. Morrison said postpartum psychosis can last months. We could petition for emergency custody if she becomes a danger to herself or the baby. Then Daniel's response. I know, but Violet deserves a stable home. A stable home with you two? With us. The way it should have been from the start. Judge Walsh's face hardened. Patricia presented the browser history, the hotel receipts, the restaurant reservations. The timeline showing the affair started before Violet was born. Your Honor, Patricia said, this isn't about a mother's mental health. This is about a father and his mistress fabricating a crisis to justify taking custody of a child. The mother is guilty of nothing more than being exhausted while caring for an infant largely alone. Meanwhile, the father has been conducting an affair with her sister and planning to remove the child under false pretenses. Harrison tried to recover, arguing that even if the affair happened, it didn't mean Daniel wasn't genuinely concerned about my mental state. But the damage was done. Judge Walsh adjourned for the day to review all evidence and testimony. She'd issue a ruling the next morning. I went back to Mom's house and held Violet for hours, breathing in her baby smell and trying not to think about losing her. Mom sat with me. I'm sorry, she said again. I didn't understand what they were doing. I know, I told her. They fooled both of us. That night, I barely slept. Patricia had seemed confident, but I'd seen enough custody cases go sideways to know nothing was guaranteed. The next morning, we assembled in the courtroom again. Judge Walsh entered and didn't waste time. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence, she said. This court finds that the emergency motion for custody transfer is denied. The evidence shows no credible threat to the minor child's safety or well-being. What the evidence does show is a calculated effort by the father and the mother's sister to manufacture a mental health crisis that does not exist. Relief flooded through me. Furthermore, Judge Walsh continued, given the deception involved and the affair between the father and maternal aunt, I'm ordering that Isabel Brennan have no unsupervised contact with the minor child pending the divorce proceedings. I'm also ordering a full custody evaluation for the divorce case, though I note for the record that the father's credibility has been severely damaged by his conduct in this matter. She looked directly at Daniel. You tried to take this child from her mother by lying about her mental state. That's not concern. That's cruelty. If you genuinely believed your wife was having a mental health crisis, you would have gotten her help, not plotted to take her child away. The gavel came down. Daniel's face had gone white. Isabel was crying. Harrison gathered his papers in silence. I walked out of that courtroom with Violet's car seat in one hand and my head high. 2 weeks later, Daniel moved out of our house. I moved back in with Violet. He was granted supervised visitation twice a week at a neutral location. Isabel was banned from attending. The divorce proceedings began in earnest. Patricia filed for full custody with Daniel receiving limited visitation rights. We filed on grounds of adultery and emotional abuse. Daniel's lawyer tried to negotiate. They wanted shared custody, 50-50 time. Daniel claimed he'd made a mistake but was still Violet's father and deserved equal parenting time. Patricia shut it down. Your client committed adultery with his wife's sister while she was pregnant and immediately postpartum. He then conspired to paint her as mentally ill to steal custody. He's lucky my client isn't pursuing criminal charges for fraud. What criminal charges? Harrison asked. Filing false allegations with intent to deprive someone of custody is a crime in this state. Patricia replied calmly. Defamation. Conspiracy. Should I continue? We received a better offer the next day. Daniel would agree to primary custody remaining with me. He'd have supervised visitation that could potentially become unsupervised after 6 months of consistent, appropriate behavior. He'd pay child support based on his income. He'd cover all legal fees. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges or file a civil suit for emotional damages. I accepted. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my daughter safe and my life back. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. I got the house, primary custody, and a substantial child support payment. Daniel got his guilt and his relationship with Isabel, which apparently fell apart within weeks once the excitement of sneaking around was gone. Mom and I worked on rebuilding our relationship. She'd been genuinely deceived by Isabel's performance and felt horrible about it. She testified honestly about what she'd observed, not realizing it was being weaponized. I forgave her. She'd been manipulated too. Isabel tried to reach out several times, text messages saying she was sorry, she'd made a terrible mistake, she missed me and Violet. I blocked her number. She sent letters to the house. I returned them unopened. 6 months after the divorce, I was settling into single motherhood. Violet was thriving. She was hitting all her milestones, sleeping better, and had the most infectious giggle. I'd started working again part-time from home, doing freelance graphic design. Money was tight even with child support, but we managed. Then one afternoon I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Violet's mother?" a woman's voice asked. "Who's calling?" "My name is Ramona Castellano. I'm Daniel's ex-wife, his first ex-wife." I sat down slowly. Daniel had been married before me. He'd mentioned it once early in our relationship, dismissing it as a brief starter marriage in his 20s that ended amicably. I'd never thought much about it. "I know this is strange," Ramona said, "but I've been following your custody case. A mutual friend told me what happened, and I need to talk to you about Daniel." We met for coffee the next day. Mom watched Violet while I drove to a cafe across town. Ramona was in her late 30s with dark curly hair and tired eyes. She ordered a latte and sat across from me with her hands wrapped around the cup. "I was 22 when I married Daniel," she began. "He was 25. We met at work. He was charming, attentive, and everything I thought I wanted. We got married after dating for 8 months. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 6 months into the marriage, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, but I was happy about it. Daniel seemed happy too at first. Then things changed. "How?" I asked. He became distant, critical. He'd complain that I was too tired, too emotional, too focused on the pregnancy. He started working late, coming home at odd hours. My stomach knotted. I found out he was having an affair when I was 7 months pregnant, with a woman from his gym. When I confronted him, he said I'd let myself go, that I wasn't the woman he married anymore, that he needed someone who still made him feel desired. I felt sick. I filed for divorce before the baby was born. I wanted full custody, but back then, I didn't have the evidence you had. The courts gave us joint custody, 50-50 split. Ramona's eyes filled with tears. My son's name was Christopher. He was beautiful, perfect. And for the first year the custody arrangement worked, Daniel would take him every other week. He seemed to be an adequate father. Was? I asked quietly. Christopher died 3 weeks before his second birthday, Ramona said. He drowned in Daniel's pool during Daniel's custody time. I stopped breathing. Daniel said he'd just gone inside for a minute to answer a phone call, that Christopher must have slipped out the back door and fallen in. The police investigated but ruled it accidental death. No charges were filed. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. Ramona wiped her eyes. "Thank you. It destroyed me. I spent years in therapy trying to cope with the guilt of having left my son with him that day." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. A beautiful little boy with dark curls and huge brown eyes grinning at the camera. But about a year ago, I was going through old storage boxes and found Christopher's medical records from his pediatrician appointments during that last year of his life. I'd never looked at them closely before. The grief was too much. "What did you find?" "Multiple visits for unexplained bruises. 3 incidents of Christopher showing up to daycare with injuries Daniel claimed happened during normal toddler play. 1 emergency room visit for a suspected concussion that Daniel said came from Christopher falling downstairs." My hands started shaking. I started digging deeper. I talked to the daycare workers who remembered that year. One of them said she'd been concerned about Christopher's safety, but hadn't reported it because Daniel was always so charming and had explanations for everything. Another said Christopher had seemed scared sometimes when Daniel picked him up. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because when I heard about what Daniel did to you, how he tried to take your daughter by lying about your mental health, it sounded familiar. He's done this before. Different method, same goal. He wants control." Ramona leaned forward. "I can't prove Daniel killed Christopher. The investigation was closed. But I've never believed it was an accident. Christopher was terrified of the pool. He wouldn't go near it. And Daniel had taken out a life insurance policy on him 3 months before he died. A $250,000 policy. Did the police know that?" I told them. "They said lots of parents have life insurance on their kids. It wasn't considered suspicious." "What about the woman he was having an affair with?" "She disappeared from his life immediately after Christopher died. I tried to find her years later but couldn't track her down." We sat in silence for a moment. "I'm telling you this because you need to know who your daughter's father really is," Ramona said. "You won that custody battle, but he still has visitation rights. You need to be vigilant." I went home that day and immediately called Patricia. "We need to file for termination of visitation rights," I said. Then I told her everything Ramona had shared. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "This is serious. But it's also old and nothing was ever proven. It'll be hard to use this to change the existing custody order. There has to be something we can do. I can file a motion to have his visitation suspended, pending an investigation into his first child's death. But I'll be honest with you. It's a long shot. The death was ruled accidental. Unless we find new evidence, a judge probably won't reopen it. What if Ramona testifies? About what? Her suspicions? That won't be enough. We need something concrete. I spent the next week researching everything I could find about Christopher's death. I found the police report, the autopsy results, the investigation summary. Everything pointed to accidental drowning. But I also found something else. A neighbor who'd lived next to Daniel at the time had written a blog post years later about the tragedy. She mentioned that she'd seen Daniel and a woman arguing in his driveway the day before Christopher died, that she'd heard raised voices and what sounded like threats. I tracked down the neighbor. Her name was Beverly Cho, and she still lived in the same house. When I called and explained who I was, she went quiet. I've thought about that day for years, she finally said. I should have called the police when I heard them fighting. Maybe Christopher would still be alive. What exactly did you hear? The woman was yelling at Daniel, saying she was done, that she couldn't do this anymore. Daniel was trying to calm her down, saying they just needed to wait a little longer. That once the custody situation was resolved, they could be together openly. Resolved how? I don't know. But the way he said it made me uncomfortable. And then the next day, Christopher was dead. Would you be willing to testify to what you heard? Beverly hesitated. I'm 68 years old. I don't want trouble. A little girl's safety could depend on this, I said. Please. She agreed. Patricia filed the motion. The judge set a hearing for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Daniel's supervised visitation continued. I watched those visits like a hawk. I'd drop Violet off at the visitation center and wait in my car the entire 2 hours, watching through the window. Daniel would play with her, read her books, act like a doting father. But I never forgot what Ramona had told me. The hearing was tense. Patricia presented Beverly's testimony about the argument. She presented the timeline of the life insurance policy. She presented the medical records showing Christopher's injuries. Harrison argued it was all circumstantial, that grief-stricken ex-wives and elderly neighbors were not reliable witnesses, that the police had thoroughly investigated Christopher's death and found no foul play. Judge Walsh looked troubled but non-committal. Then Patricia played her final card. She'd hired a private investigator to find the woman Daniel had the affair with during his first marriage. Her name was Felicity Marsh, and the investigator tracked her down living in Oregon under a different last name. Felicity agreed to testify via video call. She appeared on the courtroom screen looking nervous, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Patricia asked her to describe her relationship with Daniel. We had an affair while he was married to Ramona, Felicity said. It lasted about 8 months. He told me he was going to leave her, that they were separating anyway because of the baby. Did he ever discuss custody arrangements? Yes. He was angry that Ramona wanted full custody. He said she was trying to keep his son from him, that it wasn't fair. Did he ever suggest ways to change that situation? Felicity looked down. He talked about how if something happened to Ramona, if she was proven to be an unfit mother, or if she was out of the picture, he'd get full custody automatically. And what happened after Christopher died? Felicity's voice broke. Daniel called me that night. He was crying, saying it was an accident, but there was something in his voice that scared me. When I saw him the next day, he seemed calm, too calm, like he'd been expecting it. What did you do? I ended things. I told him I couldn't do this anymore. I moved across the country within a month. I've spent 15 years trying to forget about Daniel and what happened to that little boy. Do you believe Christopher's death was an accident? No, Felicity whispered. I don't. Harrison tore into her on cross-examination. He pointed out she had no evidence, only feelings, that she'd willingly participated in an affair and was now trying to rewrite history out of guilt. But the damage was done. Judge Walsh took a 1-hour recess to review everything. When she returned, her face was grave. This is an extremely difficult situation, she said. The death of Christopher Brennan was investigated and ruled accidental. This court cannot and will not retry that case. However, the pattern of behavior presented gives me significant concern about the minor child Violet's safety during unsupervised visitation. She looked at Daniel. Mr. Brennan, your first wife has testified about your controlling behavior and affair during her pregnancy. Your second wife has presented evidence of an identical pattern, affair during pregnancy, attempts to paint her as unfit, plotting to remove custody. The circumstances surrounding your first child's death, while ruled accidental, raise questions. I'm not terminating your parental rights, Judge Walsh continued, but I am suspending all visitation, supervised or otherwise, pending a thorough psychological evaluation and parenting capacity assessment. If and when you complete those assessments to the court's satisfaction, we'll revisit the visitation schedule. Daniel's face went red. This is insane, he shouted. You can't keep me from my daughter based on conspiracy theories from bitter ex-wives. Judge Walsh's eyes went cold. I can and I am. You're dismissed. Daniel stormed out. Isabel, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom despite the no-contact order, followed him. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. The psychological evaluation took 6 weeks. Daniel met with 3 different mental health professionals who assessed his personality, his parenting capacity, and his risk factors. The reports came back concerning. All 3 evaluators noted narcissistic personality traits, poor emotional regulation, and a pattern of manipulative behavior in relationships. None could definitively say he was a danger to Violet, but all recommended continued supervised visitation with regular reassessment. Judge Walsh reviewed the reports and issued a new order. Daniel could have supervised visitation twice a month for 2 hours each time. The supervision had to be provided by a court-approved professional supervisor, not a family member. He had to attend mandatory counseling. If he missed any sessions or violated any terms, visitation would be suspended immediately. Daniel agreed, probably because he had no choice. For the next year, he showed up to those visitation sessions sporadically. Sometimes he'd come and play with Violet for the full 2 hours. Other times he'd cancel last minute. Twice he didn't show up at all. Violet started forgetting who he was. She'd cry when I dropped her off, reaching for me and calling for Mama. The supervisor noted that Daniel seemed frustrated by this, showing little patience for the normal attachment behaviors of a toddler. After 14 months, Daniel filed a motion to reduce his visitation to once a month. He claimed his work schedule made twice-monthly visits difficult. I didn't object. Less time with him meant more safety for Violet. Around that same time, I got another call. This one from a woman named Brooke Castellano. "I'm Ramona's sister," she said. "She gave me your number. I hope that's okay." "Of course. How is Ramona?" "She's okay, working through things, but she wanted me to tell you something she recently learned." "What's that?" "Daniel took out a life insurance policy on Violet." My blood ran cold. "When?" "Right after the custody modification. The payout is $400,000. Ramona only found out because she still has a friend who works at Daniel's insurance company. The friend saw the application and thought Ramona should know, given what happened to Christopher. I called Patricia immediately. Can he do that? Can he take out life insurance on her without my consent?" "Unfortunately, yes," Patricia said. "As her legal parent, even with limited custody, he can list her as a beneficiary or take out a policy on her life. It's not illegal. But after what happened to Christopher, I know, it looks bad. But we can't prove intent. Insurance policies on children aren't that uncommon, even though the amounts are usually lower. What can we do? We can file another motion to restrict his contact citing the insurance policy as evidence of concerning behavior. But honestly, a judge might see it as responsible financial planning. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking on Violet every hour, making sure she was breathing, making sure the windows were locked, making sure we were safe. The next visitation session, I told the supervisor about the policy. She made a note in her report. When Daniel arrived, she asked him about it. "It's just good planning," he said smoothly. "God forbid anything happens, I want to make sure she's taken care of. But the mother has primary custody and would be responsible for funeral costs if something happened," the supervisor pointed out. "Why such a high payout?" Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I can afford it. I want the best for my daughter." After that session, the supervisor recommended in her report that Daniel's visitation remain supervised indefinitely due to concerning behaviors and statements. Patricia filed another motion. This time, we included the insurance policy, the supervisor's concerns, and testimony from a financial expert who explained that a $400,000 policy on a toddler was unusual and financially unnecessary, given Daniel's income and assets. The hearing was brief. Judge Walsh reviewed everything and shook her head. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "I'm not going to terminate your rights without concrete evidence of intent to harm, but your pattern of behavior is deeply troubling. The insurance policy, combined with everything else, suggests an unhealthy fixation on control and financial gain, rather than genuine parental love." She ordered the visitation to remain supervised and added a new condition. Daniel had to undergo additional psychological evaluation specifically focused on his relationship with money and control. He refused. Once he refused court-ordered evaluation, Judge Walsh suspended his visitation entirely until he complied. He never did. Violet is 5 now. She doesn't remember Daniel. She's never asked about him. When she draws pictures of our family, it's just me, her, and Grandma. Ramona and I stay in touch. She's become like an aunt to Violet, and Violet loves hearing stories about Christopher. We visit his grave together sometimes. And Violet leaves flowers. Isabel tried to reconnect last year. She showed up at my house unannounced, crying and begging for forgiveness. She said she'd been in therapy, that she'd realized how badly she'd hurt me, that she wanted to be part of Violet's life. I told her no. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. She made her choice when she conspired to take my daughter from me. She doesn't get to come back now that it's convenient. Mom asked me recently if I'd ever consider letting Violet have a relationship with Daniel if he completed the evaluation and showed real change. I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No," I finally said. "Because even if he changed, even if he genuinely became a better person, I'll never forget what he tried to do, and I'll never risk Violet the way Ramona risked Christopher. Some people don't deserve second chances." Daniel moved to another state 8 months ago. He sends a child support check every month, always on time, always the exact amount. Never a dollar more, no birthday cards, no Christmas presents, just money, like Violet is an obligation rather than a daughter. I deposit the checks into a college fund for her. Last month I got one more call, this time from a detective in Colorado. "Is this the mother of Violet Brennan?" he asked. "Yes. What's this about?" "I'm investigating a case involving Daniel Brennan. He recently married a woman here who's 8 months pregnant. She filed a police report yesterday claiming he pushed her down the stairs." My stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" "She's in the hospital. Stable, but the doctors are worried about the baby." When I ran Daniel's background, your custody case came up, and the case involving his first son. The detective paused. The woman's name is Gretchen. She says Daniel has been talking about how hard it is having a pregnant wife, how she's not the same person he fell in love with. She says he's been pressuring her to name him the primary guardian on all the baby's paperwork. This can't be happening again, I said. I'm calling because I need to know if you'd be willing to testify about your experiences with Daniel if this goes to trial. Absolutely. Gretchen lost the baby 3 days later. The fall had caused placental abruption. She filed for divorce before leaving the hospital. When the detective interviewed her more thoroughly, she broke down and admitted Daniel had been physically abusive throughout the pregnancy, that he'd threatened her multiple times, that she'd been too scared to leave. The detective brought in Ramona and me to give statements. He reopened the investigation into Christopher's death with new eyes, looking at it not as an isolated incident, but as part of a pattern. 2 weeks ago, Daniel was arrested and charged with assault and domestic violence in connection with Gretchen's case. The detective is still building the case around Christopher, but Ramona finally has hope that there might be justice for her son. As for me, I'm just grateful. Grateful I documented everything. Grateful I didn't back down. Grateful I protected my daughter when it mattered most. Violet starts kindergarten in the fall. She's smart, funny, and kind. She has no idea how close she came to being taken from me. And if I have anything to say about it, she never will. Sometimes she asks why she doesn't have a daddy like the other kids. I tell her that families come in all different shapes, that some kids have 2 parents and some have 1, and some have grandparents or aunts or uncles or foster parents, and all of those families are valid and full of love. She seems satisfied with that answer. Last week, we were at the playground and she made a new friend, a little boy named Felix, whose parents are recently divorced. His mom sat next to me on the bench while the kids played. How do you do it, she asked. Single parenting. It's so hard. You just do, I told her. You do it because you have to, because your kids deserve someone who will fight for them. She nodded, watching Felix on the swings. My ex wants custody, she said quietly. He says I'm too emotional, too unstable. He's got a lawyer and everything. I turned to look at her. Document everything, I said. Every conversation, every text, every interaction. Don't let him control the narrative. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Thank you. We're all just doing our best, I told her. But some of us have to fight harder than others. Violet ran over then, her face flushed and happy, and climbed into my lap. Mama, can we get ice cream? Sure, baby. We can get ice cream. As we walked to the car, Violet holding my hand and chattering about her day, I thought about all the moments I almost lost, all the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was strong enough to survive this, all the times I wanted to give up. I'm glad I didn't, because this ordinary moment of my daughter asking for ice cream on a sunny afternoon is everything, and nobody gets to take that from us ever again.